So, hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Schooled In. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series, we take a deeper dive into some awesome cloud technologies. I'll be joined by fantastic people from out in the tech community who have kindly taken some time out of their day to come and school me in a particular tech topic. So, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. Please do take part in the chat. Drop us a comment, a like, and a subscribe. That would be awesome. Okay, so today, with the rise of fantastic technologies like augmented, virtual, and mixed reality, as well as the exponential advances of IoT, comes that blurring of real world with the fantastic world of the digital. In order to create engaging environments in 2 or 3D with an application that would help us to do that kind of enable and porting of the application to a platform like a 3D headset, or maybe we just want to get into creating video games. Either way, the application I'm going to get schooled in today is called Unity. So I'm super thrilled to be joined by the fantastic community friend, public speaker, and superb tech advocate, Mr. Keith Atherton, who today is going to school me in Unity. And hello, Mr. Atherton. How are you?
Very good, thanks, John. Good to be here, and thanks for the marvellous introduction. That was very kind.
No, absolutely. Look, Keith, we've been kind of to-ing and fro-ing and communicating over the community for a good while now, and it's great to have you back on to kind of, focus on a little bit of another technical area, something that, certainly I wouldn't say I'm an absolute novice, but I'm certainly, at the early stage, a fundamentally early part of my learning journey on. But it's 3D modeling and Unity and kind of creating those 3D applications and games and things like that. So really excited about today's session. So thank you, Keith, for kind of agreeing to come on and school me in it essentially. So look, before we jump in, I don't know if you want to give yourself a bit of an introduction, just to let you know, let our viewers know, who you are, what you're up to, and kind of how you got involved with Unity.
Yeah, great. Thanks again, John. My name's Keith Atherton. I've been a software developer for over 20 years now. I've worked throughout the UK and the US, lots of different sectors and companies. Predominantly using the Microsoft stack, lots of .NET, C#, using more Azure these days as well. And I guess the way I got into Unity is I've always had an interest in games, particularly playing them when I was younger. But then as I got older and I was getting a bit more, experienced using code, I was like, oh, I wonder if I can do this games thing myself. On the odd occasion, I do creative things like drawing and write music. I've been in a few bands. So I thought, oh, I wonder if I can bring these creative things together. It's a bit of a fun hobby project on the side, just a bit of fun. And initially, I started to look into how to make games, and there's some really expensive game engines, all kinds of different things out there that had very high price points, or they used a language like C++, something I'd not used for a long period of time. And I actually started off using Flash, so there's a reference for the kids, using Flash, Shockwave Flash in the browser. It was good for animations and basic things, but if you wanted anything game engine like, collisions, physics, you had to do all that yourself, learn the action script language and so on and so on. And then after a few years, Unity came out. I wasn't there at version 1, but it was still, I think it's maybe version 3 that I started with. It was a good few years ago. And the benefits there was that it was free. You could actually deploy to many different platforms, like mobile or PC, also consoles as well, although many of those needed a separate SDK. That was a different thing. And also it used C#. It supported C#, which was a language I was familiar with. So after a while, I just learned Unity, learned the basics myself, and actually released some sort of very basic family-friendly games to the Google Play Store and to the Apple App Store as well. So I kind of did that for about 3 years, took it seriously as a side thing for 3 years or so. And now it's just I've closed that now, but it's just a hobby. It's just fun. I do simulations, games, and just tinker with it. Really, just have fun with it.
No, and it's fantastic for you to come on and kind of teach me the basics now, Keith. Because I think, the serious side, as I tried to get across in the intro, there is that, we've got this rise, and in technologies now with mixed reality and that augmented reality, things like Meta and the ability to create these 3D environments and interact with those environments is, I mean, certainly from my layman's perspective, becoming more and more of a thing now. I don't know how you feel about that, Keith, but certainly having those skills of how to do, even if it's basic modeling with basic applications or just overlays, seems to be a thing that might become more and more popular as more and more applications start to use these kinds of technologies. I mean, what's your take on that, Keith?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. As you say, AR, VR, it's becoming a real thing now, rather than say, back in the day, back in the 90s, with the what could it do? It's quite early on. The technology maybe couldn't keep up with the ideas that we had at the time. Things are certainly going that way more, as you say, with Meta, the metaverse, and so on and so forth. And as we'll see later with Unity as well as just the game side and the experience side, you could also use it for 3D modeling, a visualization of cars and vehicles, use it for architecture and construction as well. And that's really, that's really exploded the last few years. It's really been used and adopted more and more. Even when I used to work for a construction company, and we was even looking into the idea of using Unity with, like an AR headset, like a Google Glasses or something like this, as a walkthrough of what that structure could look like when the project was finished. It was a great way to show the client what could things look like, and well, actually, could you change this here, or that looks really good. How about if we change the cladding there, or change this here? So it is, as you say, it's becoming more mainstream and more and more adopted for sure.
I mean, it's things like that I've seen certainly with the Azure platform, and certainly IoT digital twins, and the ability now they've got the digital twin studio where you can kind of develop these 3D platforms in there, to represent, like you say, those industrial pieces of machinery. And I know they've released things like spatial anchors. So certainly, if you create that 3D model of, I don't know, a piece of machinery, or you want to put an overlay of some, IoT sensor information, so that when you've got those glasses on, the spatial anchors, you can hook it to a very, geo fence of where a piece of machinery is sat in your, your manufacturing unit. So every time you look over in that direction, you've got the information there, kind of overlaid on that piece of machinery. There are so many awesomely cool applications for this that it's like, right, I've got to learn the basics. So, Keith, I mean, I guess without further ado, what are we going to look into today? What's your plan of attack for today?
Yeah, so what we can do today is we can just cover a bit more about what Unity can offer. We mentioned there about the games, the AR, the VR, but maybe just give an overview of what the platform has. And we'll just go through some basics, like how do you install it? Are there any kind of sample projects you can fire up just to get started? And we'll just cover some basic movements, some basic objects in an environment, and a very, very small amount of coding just to see us interact with those objects as well. So really just kind of a good foundational look at Unity.
No, that sounds perfect, Keith. I mean, should we jump in feet first, and I'll let you do the talking, and I'll intersplice with the silly questions, as they say.
Fantastic. Let's do it.
Right, cool. Right, with you now.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. So yeah, just as we chatted through there, obviously any questions, just feel free to jump in, or if I'm flying too fast, just say, John. But as we mentioned there, here's the webpage for Unity, unity.com. Again, there are other game engines out there. There's some really cool ones like Unreal, Game Maker. That's another popular one, started in Scotland. And there's ones called Construct as well, things where it's a bit more click and drag, a bit more beginner friendly, and ones you could maybe use for classes and groups, showing people who are brand new to IT, brand new to coding. It's a bit more easy to get started with those things. And again, a bit about Unity. The reason I got started with this is that the game engine was really complete. You've got physics, it can handle collisions, you can do 3D, 2D, again, the coding language, C# was familiar to me. They did used to support a variant of JavaScript back in the day as well, but that's now been deprecated. It really is just C#. But yeah, a bit about Unity. Again, I sort of self-taught with this. It's really grown the last few years. You can see the bit of a highlight reel just there. We talked before, games is how they started. It was actually started early 2000s by a few folk in Denmark, and it's really grown since then. I believe they did start trying making an engine to create their own games, but actually then changed tact because the engine became so advanced and so cool. They just stuck with the engine side of things. So games is really where it's come from. But as we mentioned, there's applications you could use it for: architecture, automotive. You can see all this kind of fancy lighting and rendering. It could just be really cool for the car visualizations and marketing materials and things. And also things like film as well. Things like CG or CGI. It's really grown in recent years. The processing power, the way GPUs have evolved. I mean, you can really make hyper-realistic things these days. Actually, I'll just click into this one. Let's have a look. So yeah, if you look into any of those fields on the website, you can see there's a bunch of information. They'll have several case studies and demo reels. And you can really see, do you want to play around with things other than games, just to tinker with them? What else have we got here? So yeah, they've got some information.
I was going to say, Keith, it's I mean, it's great to see, but that kind of hooks into the fact that the application and the use of Unity has gone way past just gaming. And I keep getting pop-ups on my on LinkedIn and Twitter with I'm following a lot of these other kind of platforms like you mentioned the Unreal Engine now, and maybe can we briefly talk about we mentioned things like physics and lighting. One of the pop-ups that I saw this morning, I think it was, or even yesterday, was on Unreal, I believe, about water physics, and it's unbelievable. Like unreal, I guess is probably the term, but that ability to kind of as we set a pool of water, and that the motion of water just overlays all these 3D objects. Now, that is, how do we describe that to somebody new to like an engine like this when it comes to physics? To break it down to the real basic, what do we mean by that, Keith? In terms of what physics are and lighting, what does that mean in this terms of this this engine that we're using called Unity?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I started using Flash, and it was really, you can put objects on the screen like rectangles, ellipses, circles, and then you could write a bit of code that says, okay, if I click the left mouse button, this circle will expand or it'll move to the left. I'll use the cursor keys, and that directly maps to, I'm now moving this object all around and about. So when we talk about things like the physics and the lighting and all these other things that this engine provides, a lot of that work has already been done for us. And I had a friend who spent years working on his own game engine with the aim to release games, but it was such a mammoth task that before he even got halfway through the engine, he actually just shelved the project. It was like too much to take on. So the great thing that they've done with Unity, Unreal, and many others over the years is teams of very smart people have actually developed these things for us, put them under the bonnet. We can add them if we need them. I mean, it depends what game you're making. Are you making like an Atari style 2D basic arcade game, or you're making No Man's Sky or StarCraft? So you can add these things as you need them, but these people have actually already written the code under the bonnet. As you say, things like fluid physics and water physics, that's very sophisticated because there's lots of movement. You've got the gravity taking place, the forces within those particles within it, treats it as a stream, overlapping waves and things. So a lot of this has actually been plotted out, let's say using 3D coordinates. It's been plotted under the scenes, how the physics is handled, how the movement's handled, any forces pushing against it, a raft going through the stream, something like this. And the same for lighting as well. There's a lot of work there, lots of clever maths under the bonnet has been done, so we don't need to that level. Is, okay, I detect planes in this world, like walls, floors, and ceilings. So when that lighting is projected, what surfaces does it illuminate? What strength of illumination? Do you have overlapping lights as well, different colors, shadows, and so on? So a lot of clever stuff has been done for us.
And I think it's probably worth, because it's too easy to forget that this is effectively a computer simulation, and that all kind of needs to happen. And to make it mimic the real world, like you say, the amount of pure mathematics and calculations and physics built in is brilliant. So right, okay. I mean, I guess how do we get started, Keith? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just jump back a page because there's a good point you mentioned there as well. With obviously we're talking about GPUs and processing power getting more advanced, and if you look at maybe this kind of very high quality automotive illustration just here, which is just bonkers. I mean, look, it's just
It is, yeah.
it is phenomenal. Now, with things like this, obviously they've probably created this model using very high quality GPUs, top hardware, things like this. But when I was looking at games and things on mobile devices, which were typically single or duo processors back in when I started, much lower powered, Unity and the other engines do take that into account. So if you were getting started, think, well, I just want to throw something up on a web page, or I just want to play with it on my Android phone and it's low powered. They do accommodate that as well. So with Unity, there's two things. I won't get into too much detail, but they've got something called a universal render pipeline, URP, which is for copes with any devices and it adapts to the power. And there's a high definition render pipeline as well. So again, you do play around. So what we'll do first is just talking of Unity. There are several plans, and again, I mentioned there my start was because it was free. I was doing this as a hobby. I didn't want to spend hundreds or more, and it's the same with anyone. So if you wanted to just get started, you've got these plans. I've almost predominantly used this personal free plan, and that's absolutely fine to use. You've got all the features you kind of really need. Obviously, the more you pay for the Plus, Pro, or the Enterprise, if you're doing serious development on a big open world, massive game as part of a team, you may want those other features. You can even get the source code, the source code access. You can actually request that, and it's C or C++ if you really wanted to dig to that low level. But again, that's on those higher plans if you so wish.
Right.
But really, most folks, you can go on this personal free plan right here. So there are some kind of revenue limits as well. Like if you're earning a certain amount, they do say, okay, we need you to use Plus now. But this like $100,000 revenue a year or something. That may have changed, but the details are within here anyway.
Sure.
So the way that we get started is if you're just on the Unity site, go to get started right here. Again, it can direct you to the one you want to do. Let's say I'm an individual. If you're a student, there's a free version. Let's say it's me personal. I'm just going to play around for hobby projects. Get started, and it will actually take you through the process just to install Unity itself. Now, what happens these days with Unity is something is installed first called the Unity Hub. This is really, really handy. This is just a quick way to access your projects, the Unity environment itself. So I'll just go through a couple of features here. So with this Unity Hub, we've got projects. I've just got one connected so far, just called My Project, just a dummy one. You can actually have installs as well. So this version here, this 2021.3.5 F1. Now this LTS, this is a long-term support. So this is one of the stable releases. We know if we've got this is going to be supported for the next wee while. So we know we're going to be in good hands. But you can opt for pre-release kind of preview versions if you really want to play with upcoming features or experimental features if you want to.
Got you. Yeah.
The handy thing with this as well, you can have side-by-side installs, and this hub manages this very well, where back in the day, you would just install the separate Unity environments. And the reason you may want to do this is you might have a hobby project, you want to use the latest and greatest stable version, but you may be working on a contract. Let's say if you did games for a living and you worked on a contract and it's a game that's been in development for the last 2 years, they may be using an older install. So you might you may want to have several installs at the same time on your device.
I see. Yeah, makes sense.
Now, in terms of getting started, there's a really good section in this hub as well, which is what I wanted to come to, where they've got this Learn portal. Now, this is great for getting started. If you're totally new to this, it can show you around the editor. That's a foundational tutorial. If you scroll down, there's all these different tutorials to say, setting up your first micro game, something really simple, just a few moving parts, just to get an understanding of how do you use Unity, how do the scripts work. A bit more intermediate, like using certain design patterns and things like this. So this is a really, really handy starter. I'd highly recommend. So we won't go through one, but if I click into this first micro game, it gives you a bit of a GIF. This is what it will involve. You click, click, click. Here's a description. It'll take you about 10 minutes, and it's this level. It's a foundational level. And if you actually just clicked on this, I'll bring this across. Here's the actual process. Here's the actual tutorial itself. It walks you through things step by step, lots of screenshots, lots of even how to download and install Unity itself. So again, this is a really good first point once you've got that Unity hub. And you could just go to the website to, it's just on their Learn portal as well, learn.unity.com. So again, really, really handy, that one there. So
they seem to have quite a lot of selection there as well of tutorials, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, this has grown a lot in recent years. As you say, it really has. I know when I started, it was just, here's your environment. There was a lot of good things on the website, particularly on the document side of things. But yeah, I think they've really improved this a lot for people who are brand new, people who are not even that tech savvy or code savvy. You can just dive in, and they've even got click and drag editors to be able to sort of build up games and build up some of the kind of the rendering. Different things there, even camera movement. There's things where you can click and drag. You don't need to jump into a code editor. So they've really made this very accessible and democratized game development, which was their aim from the beginning.
Well, I can see that one there, the VR beginner, the escape room. So yeah, it seems to be quite feature rich in terms of projects to work on. That looks pretty cool.
Good point there. Yeah, good point. And then very last thing here, we've got community. So here's a bunch of links. So if you're struggling for help, you've got answers, you've got different support forums and things. You can even give feedback if you've come across bugs or issues or you need help. So it's a pretty good all-round starting point. But what we'll do is we'll jump into Unity then. We'll look at a sample project. Now, perfect. I've actually already created this project just to save us some time, because some of these can take a few minutes to open. But the way I actually created this one is I went to new projects, and this is pretty handy as well. You can actually go through these starting points. You can say, look, just give me a 3D environment, just be empty, give me something to get going. Or you can actually, you've got some sample projects and things. So here's a 3D sample scene. URP, that was that universal render pipeline, so it can cope with many different devices. And all I did was just hit create project, and it actually created this for me. Again, it took a few minutes, so I'll just dive into the actual editor itself.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so here is the very busy but feature-rich Unity editor. I'll just go through just a couple of these features before we dig into anything just here, because there is a lot going on. I totally appreciate. You've got like a ton of menu options, but again, this has grown over the years. There's so much you can do with it. So in the two windows where we can actually see objects, we can see lights, we can see all sorts going on. These are kind of the main two, really. If we look on this left one here called scene, this is actually as we're playing around with different objects. We can pan, we can zoom, we can rotate things. This is actually where we're building up the environment. I'll call it the game environment, but where we build up the environment, you can add objects, you can resize them, you can do all this kind of thing. And on the right-hand side, the one that's got game is what the player or the user would actually view. So this is, the camera that's looking at the scene. If I'm playing around moving the camera in the environment, you can see that's what the actual player of the game would see. We could zoom it out, we can move it up and down and so on.
Cool. Yeah. So that's the viewpoint that the user would see from a game perspective to start then.
Exactly right,
Yeah.
exactly right. I've just zoomed that out a wee bit. There we go as well, actually. And this is just, again, so here's the objects here. Here's all the 3D objects. Here's the camera that's actually giving us this viewpoint that the player would see. And again, you could even make a game or a script that actually moves this camera. So it doesn't have to be a fixed point. It could be on a player's shoulder, kind of like a point of first player shooter thing.
Person, yeah, you got you, yeah.
Yeah, or just behind them if you want, and then it's something looking out. You can see the back of the player, you can see the environment, or it could just be fixed. It could be a simulation, it could be a visualization, whatever you wish. So without getting into too much detail, some of the objects here is on the left-hand side. Here's all the objects we can actually see in the scene. So if I go ahead and click, we've got loads of clever things with lighting, like reflection probes. We won't get into detail with that today, but there's loads of clever things you can do with lighting. Say, does it bounce off surfaces? How metallic? How shiny is it? So on, so on, so on. What kind of volume? What area do I want it to light? I don't really care about things outside of this volume, just to save processing power, so on, so on. You've actually got the camera itself. You can see when I select things here, so this is a directional light just to bathe the scene in light, almost like the sun, if you will. But you can put spotlights. You can add a dramatic spotlight that focuses on a single object if you want.
Right. Okay.
Or you can add, spotlights or underlighting or, mood lighting, anything you want in there. But when we select the different objects here on the left, we can see they select them within the view. Down here is actually all of the objects that we've got. So these example assets, we've got the materials, the things that go on the surface to give it this kind of, I don't know, granite kind of look to the floor or something like this. Different shaders to change how things look. And then you've got the the scenes, the scripts, and anything else to do with this scene are actually in this kind of this folder view right here. And then on the right hand side, if I was to select one of these, let's see what we've got. Directional light is highlighted just here. This inspector on the right is all of the different properties. I'm just going to move this out a little here. So the transform is really where in space is this object, the position, the X, Y, Z, because we're in 3D coordinates. We've got the rotation. So again, we could kind of position this and move this around. We could actually change the numbers here or just move it within the scene if we want. And then the scale as well. We might have an object here. We might want to double the size of this object, make it bigger, something like that. And you've got a ton, depending on the object you have selected, you can actually add, this one component. You can add other components with their own features, which we'll do in a moment. What kind of emission, what colors you're using. You can really dig quite low level with these.
Sure. Okay.
So there's a lot going on.
there is, isn't there? I mean, that's what I'm just taking in at the moment, is that you've got these things that are just called objects that have various properties that you can assign lots of different things to, like the mesh. What was the word that I saw? Because from what I understand, when you're overlaying like a pattern or like a granite surface like that, you can assign that to a particular type of object. I forget the word that I came across, and I was just going to run it by you, but it slips my mind now. But there's ways in doing it, because even that, the processing power, and it struck me when I saw it before. But like, I'm sure everybody can relate to a game when you kind of, quite far away in a game, you see these objects kind of spawning up as you get closer to them for memory purposes.
Exactly
and
right.
that goes as far as to say, even patterns that you have on surfaces like those shaders and things like that, they can consume quite a lot of memory, depending on how you put them. So there's a lot to consider, isn't there, I guess, Keith, with these kinds of things? There's lots of moving parts. There's a lot to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're exactly right. And as you say, for memory saving purposes, let's say if you had an open world like Red Dead and you've just got hundreds of, or GTA, you've got hundreds of characters, you probably don't want the processing of all the, rendering those characters that are out of sight in a different area, and they're all moving, they've all got their own physics and AI and everything else going on. So as you say, one way to do that is use something called level of detail, or LOD. And that's something is that based on your distance from the object is the level of detail that will be shown. So if you're face to
Yes.
face
Yeah.
right to a character, you're showing all the polygons, you're showing absolutely everything. You can see their expressions. But if they're within a certain distance, and you can set different tiers of that as well. I want to see them as a dot in the distance, or they're so far away, I don't want to see them at all. You can set
Yeah.
these level of details. And actually, funnily enough, a common I don't want to say cheat, but a common workaround back in the day was many of these kind of atmospheric games with big levels in 3D would have lots of atmospheric fog and mist, because that would occlude things that are in the
Yes.
distance, so you don't need to render them at all. So yeah, you're right. You have to, there's a lot of things to consider when you go 3D. When you go 3D, big open worlds and things like this. But there are tricks. There are ways to
It
handle
was
things like that.
it was quite funny. I think that when I first took a look at Unity, just very very briefly a while back, I watched this video about that particular topic about spawning objects. And again, these are things that you need to consider, and you think, well, okay, there's a lot to learn. It's like anything, you realize the stuff that you don't know. But I think somebody was talking about, the level of detail on a particular object, that when the camera got so close and it was there, that, like you say, that level of detail was to kind of show and spawn that object. I think because the level of detail, the patterns and the mesh and the, I keep forgetting this term, but the shader, the thing that
Hmm.
gives it its color and shape
Yeah.
and size or whatever it is, because the level of detail was it was quite intensive. This object was kind of spawning quite erratically. So they were explaining what they did, like you say, those little cheats, in that they spawned it in a different world and just moved the object. It was really, a whole new way of thinking for kind of, how you use these objects. So look, we're at the basics here, Keith. But
Yeah.
it's just, I think it's really cool and kind of important to understand where these things can go. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's other tricks as well. Let's say if it wasn't a persistent open world and you was making a game where when you enter that area, you want to trigger the spawning of objects because they've all got their own AI, different, objects. There could be a character that's like in Far Cry, they're patrolling, looking for you. They've got their own little state
Yeah.
machine, say they're patrolling, they've seen you, now they're hunting you. They're engaging with you. They're now in a state of attacking you. If you had lots of objects, hundreds or thousands, you could also do, another workaround is only spawn them when you enter that area. And that's sometimes when you can see in the game, you walk in the area and then, out of
Yeah,
thin
yeah,
air, these appear. But now the processor only needs to care about these things because they've only just appeared as well. So that, there's
yeah.
different ways, different workarounds, different strategies you can try, let's say. But as you mentioned there, just a brief note, as you mentioned, when you've got an object, let's actually zoom in on this. If I was to click on, let's see, this object just here, I'm on this workshop set. They've got these different drywalls, the ground just there. When you're on these different, there we go, it took a moment, but now I've clicked on the ground, we've got things like mesh renderers, colliders. Now materials can give it the pattern, just as you say,
Mm.
but as you say as well, we can also add a shader. The good thing with Unity and some other tools, some other engines as well, you can actually have like a kind of visual flow diagram to build up the shader to say, I want it to be this metallic, I want it to be this color, I want it to do X, Y, Z.
Got you.
I
Okay.
want it to have movement. That could be a cheat with something like water as well. Instead of the full physics of a fluid thing, you might have a shader that gives it the look and feel of water moving in a stream, but you don't have any of the actual processing um, power underneath to actually worry
Okay.
about
Yep.
all of that movement.
Yeah.
So you've kind of cheated it in a way because it's only cosmetic and that's all you care about.
Mm.
But yeah, shaders are really good, really powerful. And the great thing is that shaders, because they run on the GPU, they leave the CPU alone. And the GPU is designed for running lots of things, lots of small processes concurrently. So if you the more you can do on the shader, the more performance benefits you'll get. But again, I'm digging a bit lower level there, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's
I'm
just
with you.
something to be aware of. Great. So if you like, we can just go through the process. We can add an object
No,
to
that's
this
it's
scene.
great. Yeah, I mean, it's a great overview of, yes, there's a lot of real estate and windows, and I guess, we're not going to delve into every nook and cranny here, but that's a great overview. So we've got our project window where you are now, and that's the place that keeps our project files, our shaders, any collateral that we want to use within our scenes, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah, spot on. So these example assets, yeah, we've got all these. You can see by the naming convention as well. This is the drywall, material. There's, here's how it looks. You want to go around the object. It's a repeatable pattern that's gone across the floor. You can see these ones that have actually got this, kind of, metallic, these different surface options. Let's see if there's some in there. But yeah, as you say, we've got materials. We've actually got those models as well. It's just taking a while to load, but you can see we've got a camera, we've got a workbench, just as well.
Sorry, Keith, but I guess things like models or materials. Would I be right in thinking that there's somewhere we could go and download, a pre-built model of something? Are you familiar with any of that? I'm sensing this is an area of almost open source. A Git repo. Somebody's created this awesome model and open sourced it for others to use. Am I right in thinking that, Keith, or does it not work that way?
No, you're exactly right. Anywhere there's the demand, there's a market, right? And yeah, as you excuse me, yeah, as you say, there are plenty of places you can go. So one option, if you wanted to create them from scratch, is you could use a tool like Blender. That's a free one, a free open source tool. So, for example, I just showed this kind of, in this sample scene that they've got this workbench right here. And just for me playing about, I could just, I could turn this on and off. But yeah, this is something they provided in their sample scene. If you so wish, you can use Blender or other tools to actually create it from scratch yourself. There are other tools as well. Couple of other options to think about. Let me see. There's a few. I'll bring this one across. There's things like Sketchfab. Plenty of other websites say pre-made things. Some might be free, or you give a credit. Plenty where you'll pay for high quality assets.
Sure, yeah.
Lots of hobbyists create their own as well, and just give them away for free. Hey, just drop the URL from my website or mention my Twitter handle, this kind of thing. Some people, do make proper money off creating these models as well. I want a sci-fi pack, and that's got me the robots, the spaceships, the environments, and you pay X amount, and you've got this whole environment, and you've got your starter. You don't need to partner up with a 3D artist or anything like this.
Yeah.
You could just buy it online and play with these things. So that can be a really good starter.
No, I was going to say, Keith, because when I first looked at it again, one of the starting projects I set up was a really bland, plain world where we basically had a ball, and it was, it didn't look like the scene you've got there. So I guess to be able to bring in some of those realistic elements, it's almost like you're hitting the ground running to a certain extent, isn't it?
Exactly right. I'll just bring another. There are tons, but here's another one, CG Trader. You can see here it's broken into these categories. I want models, I want architectural.
Okay.
And again, some of these, you've got teams of really smart professionals who do this for a living. You're going to get high quality things. You're going to get all those, like we saw with the surfaces, the materials, the patterns, the textures that we need. So it could well be worth it. If you weighed up learning this from scratch and spending days or weeks on it yourself versus paying 30 quid for a pack of this stuff, weigh up your time, weigh up the cost for your time and your day rate. 30 quid, 50 quid, whatever it may be, is well worth the weeks and weeks of learning a new skill and dividing your time. Unless you really wanted to learn 3D modeling and those skills as well.
Absolutely. I suppose it's like anything then, Keith. Like you say, using Blender and those 3D modeling tools it just shows the scope. You can literally start from scratch building your own models, or you can go right the way through and buy really high quality models that have been created for you. It's fantastic. I love seeing this kind of stuff because they are so realistic, aren't they? That's great.
Want something that looks like a Corvette? Look at that. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. You can see obviously they put the full lighting, there's a highlight reel and so on. But yeah, if you had a high definition render pipeline for something like this, it's going to look the business, isn't it? I should say as well, just want to give a mention, as well as those other websites, Unity have got their own thing called the asset store, which is really good as well. Let me just go. So I just need to open a link for this one. So they've got their own kind of marketplace for these objects. And it's not just the 3D models, but their asset store is, you may want to buy something that is the code for a piece of AI for pathfinding. Or you might want to buy something with a whole environment, like a medieval environment for an RPG making, or whatever the case may be. So if you do go to the asset store, it's broken into these categories. Do you want tools, just for the workflow of making your game or making your VR experience? That will just save you time. You've got different templates, different things for audio, collections of sets for ambient sound effects and things. But yeah, as we were talking there, let's see the 3D. We'll just have a very brief look here. Okay, here we can see a featured one right at the front. Mountain environment, look at that, like a wilderness. You wanted a survival type game or something. Let me see this asset. I can see a bit more information. Okay, it's in dollars because it's very US centric for Unity, where they're based. But here's the nice demo reel. We talk about water there. Nice little waterfall.
Yeah.
So again, if you weighed up your time versus what you're going to get, it shows where it's compatible. It shows exactly what's contained.
And I suppose, Keith, it would be a case of building your, depend on what you wanted, but if it were, something like a VR or an AR, well, augmented reality is probably slightly different because you wouldn't necessarily have that scenery because you want to be able to see the real world scene. But, if you're building like a virtual reality space, if it were just like you say, a wilderness scene, you could drag all of your components, and correct me if I'm wrong, but drag all your scenery, position it correctly, and then you can start to focus on the interactive parts of that and how, what do you want to overlay with information or data, or what do you want to be able to interact with as a person in that VR space. Is that the kind of way that we would be looking at building that scene?
Exactly. Yeah, just like all the movement here, you could likely just choose the objects you want to interact with. They'll likely have meshes and things on surfaces, so if you dropped a character in there, it can walk on the surfaces and it won't fall through them. So yeah, as you say, you can then maybe customize that as much as you need. I want to add other objects. I want to be able to, I don't know, like a Minecraft, I want to chop the trees down and gather the wood, so now I'm going to write scripts or do things to interact with the trees. But you can pick and choose and customize and do whatever you want. But as you say, this is a starter. You've now got the playground. You're good to go. If you wanted to start off cheaper, just to have something, you could just adjust this slider, look for free or a cheap option. But also just have in the back of your mind, well, I want to buy that high quality set when the time is right, but I'm just going to play around with a free or a cheap environment just while I find my feet. And then when things are good, okay, now I'll splash the cash and get something high quality, to really sell this game or experience. But
well, it's like you say, free and cheap is great when you're learning. Of course it is. So
absolutely,
you don't want to go spending lots of money there just to not learn it. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. Like even there, there's a terrain one for free. Some of them may have limitations. Some of them, they may actually have a premium offering and make their money elsewhere from there, or just be offering things for free. They used to charge in the past, but now they've moved on, evolved. They don't, they're not after the money, but they still offer a really great set of things for you to get started. But as you say, as soon as you've got this, you've got those assets, you can do anything you want with them in the game. Unless the licensing says otherwise, you can play, you can remove, you can carve the environments, remove the mountains. It's yours to play with in the Unity editor when you jump back in here.
Got you.
Awesome. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add a simple object and play around and just see how we can actually change things with this environment, if you will. So again, with these different objects, these were the starter for 10 from this sample project. They actually had some props just here. Here's the inspector. We can turn things on or off if we need them. Again, we can change positions manually if we want. We can add components. Again, I might want to add a script to this. So if I clicked a button on the keyboard, it would interact with it. Or I might want to add extra lighting to it, or some kind of component that would change the behavior or the look and feel of something. So what we'll do is, as you go ahead and let me see, I think I zoomed too far out just there. So what we'll do is add an object. There we go. So a quick cheat shortcut. If ever you zoom out or get something completely wrong, if you click on an object and then click F, it focuses on that object and jumps you right back in. So yeah, if you mess up, it's quick to jump back. But what I'll do is actually in here, I'll go to, I think it's game object. And again, we looked at some of those assets elsewhere, so the fancy packs of different 3D models and things. But when you're starting off with what they call the primitive objects, just give me a volume, give me a rectangle or a sphere or a light. Here's where you can add them. You've got these different game objects. You've got this directional light, which we already have in the scene. We could have point lights or spotlights, different things, probes. You can get more in depth. Same with the audio. I want a source of audio, so it could be actually attached to a character that's trying to speak to you, communicate to you. So again, the further away from the character, the more distance the audio source, the more distance the sound. It handles things like that for us already. What we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and go to a 3D object. Now, we've got a bunch of these primitive shapes. We've got things like cubes, spheres, capsules, and so on. And again, when we add these, I'll go ahead and add a sphere. It's added one just here, so it's we can see the wireframe around it, but actually in the game view, if we see just here, it's just hovering, hovering in thin air. With these sliders, again, we can change, rotation won't make much of a difference here, but we can change scale. Let's see if we can just, there we go, we can make it bigger if we want. We can use these sliders, or we can use these pull handles. We can move it around here. And again, this is our editing environment. This is what the player sees. Let's just pull this to the side a wee bit. Let's move that out here. You see the shadows are moving, the lighting's all spot on and everything. Let's raise this a little bit higher. So if we've got a game, we've got the objects on there, or again, our experience, we want to actually see things play out, see things move. So let's say we've authored it, we've got all the characters here, we've got enemies, we've got the player character, and we want to see things work, want to play the game, test the game. We've actually got these options up here. So what we actually do is click on this play, and we actually then build everything and then play the scene out. So at the moment, I've not got anything interactable. I mean, the ball doesn't even have gravity. I mean, it's just kind of floating there. Now, what we need to do for this is, if we did want gravity there, we want to see that drop, we want to see it bounce. This is when, again, when we've got these different objects selected, we've got this ball, it's just called sphere. So I'll just call that ball. Zoom back out, I don't need that close up. So we've got the ball just there. Now, here's all the things that have come out of the box when we've added this ball from that game object menu. When we did that, it gave us this. We've got things like mesh renderers and all kinds of colliders. So there's a collider built in already. But there's no physics at the moment. That's why we don't have the gravity. It's not being dropped. And it's just through the tutorials and playing around, you'll get familiarity of, well, what component do I need? So I'll actually go ahead and add a component. And this is something so I can add some gravity to it. So when you add a component, again, do I want some audio? Do I want it to make a noise when it bounces?
Right, yeah.
Do I want some lighting on it? Do I want some, there's tons of options actually, but the one I'll actually go through is physics. You've got all these different, I mean, it's really grown in recent years. This is things like rigid body, fixed joint. So is it like a rag doll? Has it got joints and things that would move independently? There's even some for wheel colliders. So if you're making a racing car game, or a racing game of any kind, a bike or a car, you could actually be very specific on the colliders of those wheels on the surface of the ground.
Right.
And these things have come in recent years, where before you just handled a lot of it yourself. Like, this object is on the ground, I need to deal with the turning, the rotation. But here you can add this and say, well, what kind of friction with the ground? Is it a slippy surface? You could really go in depth. It's become very, very specific. There are different colliders here. Well, we already have a collider, but we want a rigid body. Now, the rigid body is just a common thing in game development parlance, which just says, well, give it some physics. We'll say what kind of mass we have. If there's any angular drag or drag at all on a surface, use gravity. This is ticked by default. So now we've got some more gravity. And we can freeze positions. Let's say if we didn't want it to move in the X or the Z, but only in the Y, just up and down. We could say, okay, we'll freeze those other planes so it can only bounce up and down on the spot. It can't accidentally bump off the edge of something and then fly off the screen. You can really be quite specific with these. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that and give this a run.
And like you say, it's just so many different things. Oh, there we go. And
it drops.
Hit the floor. Yeah.
But yeah, you can add all these, these different things just there. There's a ton of different options. Let me see actually if there's one for the bounce. I don't know if it's on one of the physics ones actually. Yeah, I forget which one the bounce is, but there's different types of colliders as well. We did you can change the position of the collider as well. So let's say if you was doing Street Fighter 2 kind of a beat 'em up game, it might be that you add colliders to the fists or to the feet at the time when you're wanting to strike. So you can change positions or change size of collider. Or you're playing an enemy and you might shrink the collider for their fist to be a bit more forgiving, so it just misses the character. It doesn't. It's not too harsh. So there's a bunch of things you can do. So one thing I might do is add a script to this sphere just so we can see us interacting with the sphere.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'll do is I will add, what I want to do is add a C# script, and when I click on the screen, I want it to push the ball. Something basic. I just want to see some movement. There's a few ways of doing this, but what I'll do is I'll actually go ahead within this hierarchy of all the objects. Now create a new empty object. I want something just to hold this script. I mean, I could add the script to the ball itself. There's other ways of doing this, but I want something for the scene in general. I'll call it the game manager. It's just giving me some kind of arbitrary position here. I'll actually just reset the transform. Just say, well, I'm not actually visibly seeing anything. I'll just for neatness. So I'll just set it to the origin 000. And here's where we can actually add components. So if I go to the project, all of the different things I have right here, I've got a scripts folder that was already pre-created for me. This is kind of a standard folder hierarchy that you'd want out the box. So when I did the sample project, it already set these up just to keep things organized. I mean, you might go into tens or many more scripts. So it's just to keep things well organized.
Yeah.
And here's this, I've actually already created this just to save time, but you can actually just go ahead and, or you've got the visual scripting I mentioned before, but you can actually just add a C# script.
Right.
And when you do that, it gives you this start of it. Here's a little preview, but we'll open it up in a proper code editor in a moment. It's just trying to read this in because I've added a script. So it's just saying, do I need to change anything? So I've added one. Default name has been this new behavior script. Those familiar with C#, we've got some using blocks of things commonly used. It's a public class that inherits this mono behavior, which is something Unity provides. And a starter for 10, what they give us is a start method. So the first frame, this is before the first frame update, this would fire. So if you wanted to kind of load anything up front.
Right, yeah.
And then update is every frame. So when you hear terms like 60 frames per second or FPS, frames per second, this is the frames are constantly running through. So you may want something that you're constantly monitoring, like as I'm pressing this key on the keyboard or this button on the controller, I want the character to be running forward or moving left or jumping.
Right, yeah.
So that's something you might want to detect constantly. Like, have they pushed the button? Have they done this? Has anything changed in the environment? So what I'll do is I've already created the script. It's similar. There's nothing in here already. I'll just go ahead and double click on this script. And this is for me, I've actually chose Visual Studio. This is something I use often, something I'm familiar with, but you can use any code editor. I mean, you could choose Notepad. You can do anything you want. When you're in Unity, you can actually go to Edit, Preferences, and you've got a bunch of options here that are just for Unity in general. So for external tools, you can say, well, my script editor, I actually want to browse and choose Notepad or Notepad++.
Sure.
I've actually just chose Visual Studio just because that's my tool of choice for C#. So yeah, you've got a bunch of things in here that we can change. So that one for the start, I'll just show a message to the screen just to see if I've got this running okay. So I just say hello. And just give this a run, see how it looks. So we've got this console just here. We can show messages, we can show errors, we can show all kinds of things. So it's just importing that script in. So if I go to this console, let's just hit play. Okay, I've totally missed something because I was expecting a message just there, but
no, okay.
Oh, here we go. Sorry, beg your pardon. I think I've not added the script. Let me see. There we go.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I did step one. Yeah, exactly right. So again, this can run for the game, the whole scene as a whole. But if you had something like a character, you may just want a script on that character that just handles all the player interactions. If you wanted something to handle a scoreboard for the game as a whole, it may be potentially a place to add it just here to manage the game as a whole. So it's really just
But I'm going to say, Keith, but I guess that's the point now, is that these are the basic constructs in that, you've shown us what an object is, you've shown how we can add components to an object to do things like gravity or add a shader or whatever it may be. And this is the next step then you would add scripts to some objects to help with that interaction. And look, these are all the building blocks that I guess, this video is not going to be an in-depth masterclass, end to end. I'm sure we'd need several days, if not weeks and months, to kind of learn, a lot of this stuff. But I mean, this is great, Keith, in terms of a way forward. So yeah, I mean, I guess now if you run that, you're going to get that message in the console window, and just to prove that point, I guess, isn't it?
There we go. I've appeased the live demo gods.
Yes,
eventually got my message. Exactly right. Great. How we're looking for time?
We're probably hitting the limits now. Another minute or two, but we can probably bring it to an end there. But well, unless you want to do anything more with the ball there, Keith, in terms of the script.
God, let's see what we can achieve in a minute or so. And but yeah, as we said there, we've got different things we can play with. We've got this start that we just I've got the message showing on the screen. We've got the update that happens every time. In fact, just as a something there, what I'll do is try and connect to that ball and then see if we can move the ball just to see if we can interact with an object in the scene. So I'm going to kind of jump over a few assumptions here, but when I write this in C#, I'm going to refer to anything in the scene as a game object. That's kind of like a catch-all term for anything there. I'm going to call it ball game object. Let me see. So on the update, we can actually connect to the input when you click on something. So even if this doesn't work and I've missed something, we kind of get an idea of what the code can look like.
Yeah.
So again, this will run every frame, and it's going to be listening for that mouse button down. So when you click, if it detects the click, it's going to jump into here. That's kind of in a nutshell what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If it does do that, I actually want to reference that ball object. I want to actually connect to the rigid body component, the one that has the physics, because with physics we can also add a force. I want it to push the ball upwards, and this is always a bit of a trial and error, but I'll try 100 to just apply some force to it. So I mean, it's only a couple of lines. We'll see what happens here. It's now going to just update this script. Now, because I've said there's a public reference to that ball object called ball game object, it's now exposed it just here for me.
Okay.
I'm flying through this, so I do appreciate this is a bit fast. If I drag this ball across, it now knows what I'm talking about. Again, there could be multiple objects in there. And let's see what I've missed. So I'll give this a run.
No, but it's like you say, it just shows how quickly potentially, with experience and knowledge and learning, but it shows how you can add with a few lines of code some of these interactions.
Exactly. And those tutorials are great for it. And I actually did a lot of self-learning from a really good channel that they've stopped. They don't publish content. And there's so many good ones out there and paid ones. You can do paid courses, of course, on Skillshare and other places, Pluralsight, and LinkedIn Learning is very good as well. But I was just self-taught. I self-taught during my lunch breaks for, I don't know, the best part of the year. I was learning all kinds of things. And as you say, when you boil the essence to, that's 2 lines of code for that, like, oh, wow. So give this a quick run. Let's see if I actually wire this up okay. If I click anywhere in the scene, because it's not just on the ball, it's just, all right.
Yeah.
If I keep clicking away, I keep adding more force, and it will just draw up right back down. So there's a way we can interact with the object in a very, very simple way.
Well, do you know what, Keith? That's probably a really notable point to bring it to an end. I mean, that's been fantastic. I mean, let's jump back on over to our Two-Face. But
Great.
Keith, I mean, that's been great. It's been a really good introduction to Unity. Like I say, it's certainly been one of those technology platforms that I've wanted to jump in, and that's really given me a really great starting point, especially around, how to kind of bring things into the scene and start to interact with them. And I guess it's a learning curve now. But Keith, thank you. I mean, have you got anything else to add before we bring this to a close today?
No, just other than thanks for having me on the show. It's always, I don't use Unity as much as I would like these days. I do love using it. It's so powerful, even just for tinkering with 3D and simulation. And so it's been really great to just fire it back up and have a play. And if anyone's got any questions, I'm certainly not an expert, uses it every day, but I'm very familiar. I'm always happy to help and share the knowledge. So if anyone's got any questions, just feel free to hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'll see if I can help out.
No, really appreciate that, Keith, and well, thank you so much for being an awesome guest again on this show. So yeah, I'm going to go and run off and start learning Unity now. I keep promising myself that. But Keith, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving your time up and coming in and show me Unity today.
My pleasure. Thanks, John.
See you soon.
Bye now.